Fukuyama took the term and the concept of the end of history from German philosopher George Hegel. Hegel used that expression to describe the world historic consequences of the 1806 Battle of Jena, in which the army of Napoleonic France defeated the Kingdom of Prussia. In the aftermath, the French occupied and governed Western and Southern Germany. Hegel was one of a small number of prominent German intellectuals who supported and collaborated with the Napoleonic regime that he considered to be historically progressive. Hegel's concept of the end of history had both a negative and a positive component. The negative component was that the dominant ideology of late feudal Europe, monarchical absolutism sanctioned and supported by the Christian churches, had lost its former power to shape the future course of history. The positive component was that the liberal principles of the French Revolution, as understood by Hegel and represented for him by Napoleon, had become all-conquering in the realm of ideas, and over time a new socio-political order would be established throughout Europe in conformity with the new Zeitgeist, spirit of the age. Likewise, Fukuyama's version of the end of history had negative and positive components. The negative component was, of course, the death of communism. Quote, "While communist power persists in the world, it has ceased to reflect a dynamic and appealing idea. Those who call themselves communists now find themselves fighting continuous rearguard actions to preserve something of their former position and power. Communists now find themselves in the unenviable position of defending an old and reactionary social order whose time has long since passed, like the monarchists who managed to survive into the 20th century. The End of History and the Last Man, 1992. Fukuyama expressed here a common coin among all currents of post-Soviet bourgeois ideology. It was the positive conclusion he drew from the collapse of the Soviet bloc that was the crux of his end of history thesis. He maintained that the social cultural values and corresponding economic and political institutions of the Western capitalist world would eventually prevail on a global scale. It is against this background that the remarkable worldwide character of the current liberal revolution takes on a special significance, for it constitutes further evidence that there is a fundamental process at work that dictates a common evolutionary pattern for all human societies. In short, something like a universal history of mankind in the direction of liberal democracy. And if we are now at a point where we cannot imagine a world substantially different from our own, in which there is no apparent or obvious way in which the future will represent a fundamental improvement over our current order, then we must also take into consideration the possibility that history itself might be at an end. Emphasis in the original. Fukuyama's notion of a universally triumphant liberal revolution came under heavy fire from some prominent intellectual spokesmen for American imperialism. His main antagonist was Samuel P. Huntington, who counterposed his own clash of civilization thesis to Fukuyama's end of history. Referring specifically to Fukuyama, he commented condescendingly, "The moment of euphoria at the end of the Cold War generated an illusion of harmony, which was soon revealed to be exactly that. The Clash of Civilizations and the Remaking of the World Order, 1996. To be sure, Huntington agreed with Fukuyama that there would never again be a powerful states or an international political movement having mass support that claimed to represent a universal alternative, such as communism, to Western-style capitalism, Western-type capitalism, and democracy. But he maintained that such much of the world, in particular Russia, the Islamic East, and China, would be dominated by anti-Western governments and political movements based on national and religio-cultural values and traditions." Quote, "In this New World, the most pervasive, important, and dangerous conflicts will not be between social classes, rich and poor, or other economically defined groups, but between peoples belonging to different cultural entities. The West is and will remain for years to come the most powerful civilization, yet its power relative to that of other civilizations is declining. As the West attempts to assert its values and to protect its interests, non-Western societies confront a choice. Some attempt to emulate the West and to join or to bandwagon with the West. Other Confucian and Islamic societies attempt to expand their own economic and military power to resist and to balance against the West. A central axis of the post-Cold War world politics is thus the interaction of Western power and culture with the power and culture of non-Western civilizations. The Huntington-Fukuyama debate underscores the need for us to differentiate between the belief in the death of communism, which is pervasive and still current, and the limited and short-lived American imperialist triumphalism in the immediate aftermath of the fall of the Soviet Union. Brief concluding thoughts. A very important question confronting us can be formulated in this way. Is it possible that a spontaneous upheaval involving a substantial section of the working class against a right-wing government can lead to a pre-revolutionary and even a revolutionary situation? That is, organs of dual power. Even though the mass of workers and other toilers involved do not aspire to socialism? I think the answer is yes. While we have not experienced such a development, we should not rule it out. For now, our primary task is to propagate a Marxist worldview with the expectation of recruiting relatively small numbers of leftist intellectuals and advanced workers. To paraphrase John Maynard Keynes, when the facts change, so will our perspectives.